The 1600s in Paris were a city of contrasts. Narrow, winding streets hemmed in by ancient stone buildings, juxtaposed with grand new constructions commissioned by the monarchy and wealthy elites. The city's population had grown significantly, reaching around 400,000 by mid-century, making it the largest city in France. Paris was a labyrinth of districts, each with its own character. The Isle de la Cité, the historical heart, was dominated by the imposing Notre Dame Cathedral, its spires reaching skyward like a beacon for the faithful, while the bustling market of Les Halles hummed with merchants and customers trading goods from across France and beyond. The architecture of Paris reflected both continuity and change. Timber-framed houses leaned over cobblestone streets, their upper stories often cantilevered over the road, creating narrow, shaded lanes that were perpetually damp and dim. The streets were alive with the smells of smoke from hearths, horse manure, and the occasional waft of bread baking from a nearby boulangerie. Wealthier Parisians, meanwhile, had begun to inhabit hotels particuliers, grand townhouses with walled gardens, in emerging districts like Le Marais. These buildings showcased ornate facades, sculpted stonework, and intricate iron gates, signaling the rising influence of France's aristocracy in the urban landscape. Daily life in Paris was a mixture of toil and spectacle. Artisans worked in their shops, often at the front of their homes, producing everything from textiles to metal goods. Streets were crowded with people, merchants calling out their wares, street performers entertaining passers-by, and beggars seeking alms from the more fortunate. Horse-drawn carts struggled along the uneven roads, transporting firewood, grain, and the occasional luxury goods from the countryside. Taverns and inns dotted the streets, offering food, drink, and lodging, while cafes began to appear toward the century's end, becoming hubs of conversation and debate. Public spaces were where social hierarchies collided. Noblemen in elaborate dress walked alongside laborers and street vendors, while parish priests, monks, and nuns moved among the faithful, asserting the church's presence in every neighborhood. Religion dominated both the physical and cultural landscape. Churches were central to community life, not only as places of worship, but also as hubs for charity, education, and civic engagement. The Counter-Reformation had strengthened the Catholic Church's influence, leading to elaborate ceremonies and the commissioning of religious art and architecture. Parisians often attended daily masses, processions, and festivals dedicated to saints, which enlivened the city with color, music, and ritual. Yet religious tensions simmered beneath the surface. Protestant Huguenots had been increasingly marginalized, and memories of past conflicts, including the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, lingered, shaping social and political interactions across the city. Paris in the 1600s was also a city of sensory extremes. In summer, the streets teemed with life, with merchants and children spilling out onto sunlit squares, while in winter, the Seine often froze at its edges, forcing carts and pedestrians to navigate treacherous ice. Sounds were relentless. Church bells tolling the hour, the clatter of hooves on stone, hawkers shouting their goods, and the occasional scuffle or duel breaking out in a shadowed alley. Smells were equally varied, ranging from fresh bread and roasted meats to the less pleasant odors of waste and stagnant water. This combination of sights, sounds, and smells created a living tapestry, giving Paris its unique character, a place at once vibrant, chaotic, and profoundly human. The 1600s marked a period of intellectual and artistic ferment in Paris, as the city emerged as a European center of learning, culture, and patronage. Scholars, artists, and philosophers gravitated toward the capital, drawn by the opportunities afforded by the monarchy, religious institutions, and wealthy patrons. The University of Paris, particularly the Sorbonne, continued to exert enormous influence, educating clergy, lawyers, and civil servants. Students in black robes crowded lecture halls, debating theology, law, and philosophy under the watchful eye of professors who demanded rigorous adherence to scholastic traditions, even as new ideas began to ripple through the city. Parisian theaters were gaining prominence. By mid-century, performances of classical tragedy and comedy drew audiences eager for drama, spectacle, and the novelty of the stage. Playwrights like Pierre Corneille were beginning to shape the French classical theater, emphasizing noble characters, moral dilemmas, and poetic language. The theater became a space not only for entertainment, but also for reflection on society, politics, and human behavior, often attended by the elite who wished to display their taste and education. Street performers, puppeteers, and musicians complemented these more formal venues, ensuring that artistic expression was accessible to all social classes, not only the aristocracy. Artistic patronage flourished under the monarchy. Louis XIII and his ministers commissioned grand works of painting, sculpture, and architecture that celebrated both religion and royal authority. Painters like Simon Vouet, who had absorbed influences from Italy, introduced a dynamic Baroque style to Paris, characterized by dramatic lighting, vivid color, and expressive movement. Churches, chapels, and civic buildings were adorned with these works, reinforcing the intertwining of art, power, and spirituality. Sculptors and craftsmen worked alongside architects to create monumental facades, fountains, and urban features that transformed the cityscape, bridging the gap between utility and aesthetic splendor. Printing and literature were central to Parisian intellectual life. The city's numerous presses churned out books on theology, philosophy, law, and science, often heavily censored, but widely circulated among scholars and the literate bourgeoisie. Salons began to emerge in the later part of the century, private gatherings where intellectuals, writers, and aristocrats discussed ideas, poetry, and current events. These meetings sowed the seeds for the French classical age of literature, producing debates that would influence thinkers like Descartes, Pascal, and later the Enlightenment philosophers. Pamphlets and broadsheets circulated widely, allowing news, gossip, and polemics to spread rapidly, making Paris a hub of ideas as much as commerce. Music filled both sacred and secular spaces. The organ resonated through cathedrals, while court musicians performed for the royal household, aristocratic banquets, and public festivals. Street musicians and minstrels ensured that melody permeated city life, bridging class divides and enlivening markets and fairs. Dance, too, was a popular form of expression, with both folk traditions and courtly styles influencing public entertainment. Masques and ballets emerged as complex spectacles combining music, costume, and narrative, often celebrating royal events or religious feasts. The combination of academic rigor, artistic innovation, and vibrant popular culture made Paris in the 1600s a city of both tradition and experimentation. It was a place where the weight of history met the energy of creativity, where ideas competed in salons, theaters, and churches, shaping the identity of France and influencing Europe. This cultural ferment was inseparable from the city's physical and social fabric, as streets, squares, and markets provided the stages for everyday life, while churches, universities, and theaters created the arenas for intellectual and artistic expression. The Paris of the 1600s was not only a center of culture and commerce, but also a stage for the assertion of royal authority, social negotiation, and political intrigue. France had emerged from the wars of religion in the late 16th century, and the monarchy sought to consolidate power under Louis XIII and later Louis XIV. The city, as the seat of government and administration, became the epicenter of political life, where courtiers, magistrates, and financiers intersected in complex hierarchies. Royal power was increasingly visible in the urban landscape. The Louvre, long a royal residence, was expanded and modernized, signaling the monarchy's dominance. Royal gardens, bridges, and squares were constructed to demonstrate order, control, and splendor, reinforcing the king's presence across the city. Urban planning began to take shape, though medieval streets still dominated. Authorities attempted to regulate markets, streets, and public behavior, often with mixed success, as Paris remained a dense, unpredictable, and highly social environment. Political factions and social unrest punctuated daily life. Parisian guilds, the Parlement of Paris, and various civic authorities wielded influence and sometimes resisted royal directives. Riots and uprisings, often sparked by taxation, grain shortages, or political tension, reminded the monarchy of the city's volatility. The Fronde, which erupted later in the century, highlighted the delicate balance between central authority and local power, demonstrating how Parisian citizens could shape national politics through protest, negotiation, and occasional violence. Economic activity underpinned the city's political significance. Merchants, bankers, and craftsmen played crucial roles in supplying the royal court and maintaining the city's infrastructure. The Seine was central to commerce, allowing goods to flow into the city from the provinces and abroad. Markets and fairs, carefully regulated, were venues for both trade and social interaction, while the guild system ensured professional standards and social cohesion, though often at the cost of rigid hierarchies. Urban transformation accelerated during this century. Bridges were rebuilt, quays along the Seine were reinforced, and new streets were laid to improve movement and trade. Efforts to beautify and modernize the city included the construction of squares, fountains, and ceremonial avenues, foreshadowing the grand urban projects of Louis XIV's Paris. Churches and public buildings were renovated to reflect contemporary tastes and ideals of power, merging functionality with grandeur. Yet despite these changes, many neighborhoods retained a medieval character, with narrow alleys, hidden courtyards, and densely packed housing, giving Paris a sense of continuity amid transformation. Life in the city remained dynamic, often precarious. Epidemics, fires, and floods threatened residents regularly, requiring communal resilience and improvisation. The city's population included a broad spectrum: aristocrats seeking influence, merchants pursuing wealth, artisans perfecting their crafts, scholars studying texts, beggars eking out a living, and soldiers patrolling streets. Their interactions created a complex social fabric, balancing cooperation, competition, and conflict. By the end of the 1600s, Paris had solidified its position as the cultural, political, and economic heart of France. The city's physical form, social dynamics, and intellectual life reflected a society in flux, negotiating between tradition and innovation, control and chaos. Streets and buildings told the story of centuries past, while theaters, salons, and marketplaces hinted at the potential of ideas and creativity. Paris was alive, both a mirror of its nation's ambitions and a laboratory for the future, a city where history, culture, and power intertwined in a vivid, unforgettable tableau.